Joel Hargrove had not slept past 5 in the morning in 3 years. Not because he was ambitious. Not because he had somewhere important to be. But because the dairy farm did not care what time you went to bed the night before. And the 62 goats in his barn were not known for their patience. Every morning it was the same. Boots on before the sun came up, coffee in a thermos he never finished, and a mental checklist so long it had started bleeding into his dreams. He was 41 years old. He had calluses on both hands, a truck with 140,000 miles on it, and a 7-year-old son named Arthur, who drew pictures of rocket ships on the back of unpaid bills. Joel did not talk about his wife often. When people in Millhaven asked, and they did, small towns being what they are, he would say simply that she had passed 2 years ago, and that he and Arthur were doing fine. The part about doing fine was not entirely true, but Joel had found that the truth in its full form tended to make people uncomfortable in ways that neither party knew how to recover from. So he kept things short. He kept things moving. The farm had been in his family for 30 years, passed from his father to him with the understanding that hard work would be enough to keep it alive. For a while, it was. Then feed prices climbed. Then the refrigeration unit in the main barn went out and cost him $11,000 to replace. Then Susan got sick. And the medical bills arrived in a wave that felt almost deliberate in its cruelty. By the time the farm debt, and the hospital debt, and the ordinary, unremarkable debt of raising a child alone, had stacked themselves into something he could no longer ignore. Joel had begun doing math at the kitchen table, late at night in a way that scared him. He did not let Arthur see the math. What Arthur saw was his father making pancakes on Saturday mornings, helping him build a wooden birdhouse for the school science fair, and reading to him every night from a collection of adventure stories Susan had picked out before she was gone. Joel made sure of it. Whatever was falling apart around them, that part would hold. On a Tuesday in early October, while Joel was mending a section of fence along the eastern pasture, a car turned down his gravel drive that had no business being there. It was a silver sedan, the kind that looked like it had been detailed that morning. It parked neatly near the gate, and the door opened to reveal a woman who was, by every visible measure, not from Millhaven. She wore dark slacks and a blazer the color of charcoal, and she carried herself the way people do when they are accustomed to rooms that go quiet when they enter them. Joel recognized her after a moment, the way you recognize someone you have only ever seen in a professional context. On a website, or a magazine, or a newspaper story about business growth in the region. Her name was Diane Ashcraft. She ran Ashcraft Development, one of the larger real estate and land development firms in the state. He had seen her name on documents that arrived at the farm several months ago, when a representative of her company had reached out about purchasing the eastern acreage. He had not responded. She walked toward him with the same directness she presumably brought to boardrooms and negotiations, stopping a few feet from the fence line and looking at him with an expression that was difficult to read. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "That's me." She paused, as if she had rehearsed the next part and was reconsidering it now that she was actually here. "My father grew up about 12 miles from here, in Crestwood." She said it like it explained something. "He passed away 8 months ago. Before he died, he told me I spent too much time acquiring things and not enough time understanding where they came from." She glanced at the fence post Joel was holding, then back at his face. "He specifically mentioned you." Joel set the post down slowly. "Your father mentioned me. He said you were raising your boy alone out here and doing it with more dignity than most men he'd known. He said if I ever wanted to understand what actually mattered, I should come talk to you." She looked briefly self-conscious, which seemed to cost her something. I told him that was a strange thing to put in a conversation about inheritance. He laughed at me. Joel studied her for a moment. She was maybe 38, he guessed. There were no rings on her fingers and a look behind her eyes that he'd started to recognize in people who had achieved a great deal and found the achievement quieter than expected. "Why are you here, Miss Ashcraft?" he asked. Not unkindly. She straightened slightly. "Officially, to discuss the land offer we sent in the spring. You never responded, I know, and unofficially." She paused. "I suppose I'm here because my father asked me to be, and I've been ignoring that request for 8 months, and I'm tired of ignoring it." Joel looked toward the farmhouse. Through the kitchen window, he could see the edge of Arthur's head, bent over the table, homework, or another drawing, or probably both at the same time. "You can come inside," he said finally, "but I'm not selling the eastern acreage." She came inside. Arthur looked up from his drawing with the unfiltered assessment children apply to strangers and said, "You smell like a hotel." Diane looked startled for a moment, then laughed, a real laugh, not a polished one, and said, "That's probably accurate." Arthur nodded as if this settled something and went back to his drawing. Joel made coffee because it was what you did. And Diane sat at the kitchen table, that still had a small rocket ship drawn in pencil on one corner, that Joel had never quite managed to scrub off. She looked at the drawing, and then at Arthur and then around the kitchen with its mismatched chairs, and the crayon drawings tacked to the refrigerator. And the stack of library books on the counter, and something in her expression shifted, in a way she didn't try to hide. "You have a good setup here," she said. And it didn't sound like a line. "It's held together with determination and agricultural tape," Joel said. "But it's ours." The conversation moved slowly at first, the way conversations do between two people who have no established shorthand. Diane asked about the farm and he told her. Not the polished version he gave to strangers, but the real one, with the feed costs and the refrigeration unit, and the debt that didn't announce itself all at once, but accumulated the way bad weather does. A little more pressure each week, until one day you look up and the sky has changed. She listened without performing sympathy, which he appreciated. At some point Arthur climbed down from his chair, assessed Diane once more, and held out the drawing he'd been working on. It was a rocket with a dog in the window, and beneath it he had written in careful, serious letters, "For the lady." Diane took it with both hands like it was something to be careful with. "What's the dog's name?" she asked. "Franklin," Arthur said. "He's the captain." "That makes sense," she said. "The dog should be captain." Arthur regarded her with new respect, retrieved the drawing since apparently it was only for showing and not keeping, and disappeared into the other room. Diane looked at Joel. "He's wonderful. He's the best thing I've ever done," Joel said. "Pretty much everything else is in service of making sure he knows that." She was quiet for a moment. "My father said something like that once. About me. I didn't understand what he meant until very recently." They talked for 2 hours. When she left, Joel walked her to her car, because it was how he was raised, and she paused with her hand on the door and said, "I don't usually do this. Come to people's farms because of a deathbed request. I don't usually have people show up to discuss land deals and end up talking about their fathers," Joel said. She smiled, and it changed her face considerably. "I'll be in the area again next week. There's a county commissioner meeting about the road improvements on Route 9. My company has some interest in the outcome." "I know about the Route 9 meeting," Joel said. "Small farmers in this county have some interest in the outcome too. Maybe we have more in common than the deed to your eastern pasture," she said. She drove away down the gravel road, and Joel stood there a moment longer than necessary, watching the dust settle, before he went back to finish the fence. She came back the following Thursday. She did not call ahead, which he would have expected from someone who operated the way she seemed to. She simply appeared at the edge of the pasture while he was moving the morning herd, and said she'd been at the commissioner meeting, and thought he might want to hear how it went. He told her the update could probably wait until he was done with 37 goats. And she said that was fine and stood at the fence rail, and watched in a way that suggested she had not watched anyone herd goats before and found it more interesting than anticipated. When he was done, she told him the Route 9 proposal had been tabled pending an environmental review. He told her that was a mixed result, better for some landowners than others. She said she knew, and that was why she was reconsidering one aspect of her company's position on the project. "You're reconsidering," he said. "I spent 20 minutes this week looking at maps of which farms would be cut off by the proposed access changes," she said, "including yours. I hadn't done that before. I'd looked at traffic projections and development value." She seemed to be choosing her words with some care. "I think I was measuring the wrong things." Joel thought about that for a while. "You didn't come back just to tell me about the Route 9 meeting," he said. "No," she admitted. "Arthur's dog drawing is on my desk at work. My assistant asked about it. I told her it was from a client consultation." He looked at her. "Is that what this is?" She met his eyes and didn't look away. "I genuinely don't know what this is. That's somewhat unusual for me." The visits became a pattern over the following weeks, quiet and unhurried, the way things that don't start with intention sometimes grow. She came on Thursday mornings, usually with coffee from the bakery in town. The good kind. Not the gas station kind, which Arthur had opinions about and which Diane learned quickly. She sat at the kitchen table while Arthur showed her his drawings and explained his various theories about space travel and the dietary preferences of rocket captaining dogs. She stopped wearing the blazer after the second week and started wearing a dark sweater instead, which Arthur approved of because, as he explained, blazers are for conferences. Joel watched all of this from a careful distance that grew less careful as the weeks passed. He had not let himself think about anyone in the 2 years since Susan died. Not because he was punishing himself, but because there had genuinely been no space for it. Grief and exhaustion and the relentless calendar of the farm had filled every available corner of his interior life, and anything that couldn't please being set outside to wait. He was not sure when he had started letting things back in. He suspected it had happened quietly, the way most real things do. One Thursday in late November, Diane arrived to find Arthur in tears at the kitchen table over a school project that had gone sideways. A diorama of the solar system that had structurally collapsed the night before and taken Saturn's rings with it. Joel had already repaired what he could, but Arthur was inconsolable in the way children are, when they have worked hard on something and then watched it fail. Diane sat down next to him without being invited. She did not tell him it would be okay. She asked him to explain what went wrong, and she listened to the full explanation, which involved structural failure, inadequate glue, and what Arthur described as a Saturn situation. Then she said, "Do you still have the pieces?" They spent the next 2 hours rebuilding the diorama. Diane had, it turned out, a surprisingly precise engineering mind and an unusual familiarity with spatial construction, which made sense when Joel later thought about it, given that she built things for a living, only on a much larger scale. By the time they were done, the solar system was not just repaired but significantly improved, with Saturn's rings reinforced and Jupiter given additional presence. Arthur declared it the best diorama in the history of Millhaven Elementary, which was a large claim, but none of the three of them disputed it. After Arthur went to bed, Joel washed the dishes and Diane sat at the table, and neither of them said much for a while, which had started to feel comfortable in the way silence only does with people you no longer need to perform for. "You're good at this," he said finally. "Rebuilding solar systems? Being here," he said. "It doesn't look like something you learned, it looks like something you are." She was quiet for a moment. "My father would have said I've been something else for most of my life. Very good at acquiring, very good at moving forward. Not very good at being still. You seem pretty still to me." "I know," she said softly. "That's new." In December, the letter arrived. Joel knew before he opened it that it was not good news. The return address was from the County Agricultural Loan Office, and the tone of official communications from that particular office had not been warm since the year the interest rate had adjusted. He read it at the kitchen table after Arthur was in bed, and then he read it again. And then he set it face down on the table, and sat with his hands flat on the surface for a long time. The loan on the farm's primary operating line was being called in early due to a covenant he had technically been in breach of for 7 months. A clause about maintaining certain revenue thresholds that the illness and the medical bills and the refrigeration unit had quietly erased. He had 60 days to settle the balance or negotiate a restructure. The balance was not small. He did not call anyone that night. He did not call his brother in Denver or the farm's attorney or Diane. He put the letter in the drawer under the phone, where Arthur couldn't find it, and went to check on the goats. Because the goats needed checking on. And because motion had always been his answer to fear. He told Diane on a Thursday 3 weeks later, only because she arrived and looked at his face and said, with the directness she'd had since the first day on the fence line, "Something's wrong, tell me." So he told her. She was quiet through all of it. When he finished, she said, "I can help with this. Financially. It's not complicated for me." He shook his head before she'd finished the sentence. "Joel?" "No," he said. Not harshly. Deliberately. "I know you can. I know it wouldn't be complicated for you. But this farm is mine because I've held it. If someone else has to hold it for me, then I'm just the caretaker." He looked at her across the table. Arthur needs to grow up knowing that his father kept this place through hard times. Not that someone with more money came and made the hard times go away. She looked at him for a long time. "That's one of the most stubborn things I've ever heard," she said. "I know, and it's also one of the most honest things I've ever heard." "I know that too." She was quiet again. Then, "Can I help in a way that isn't a check?" He didn't answer right away. "What does that look like?" "Let me think about it," she said. What it looked like, it turned out, was considerable. Diane knew the agricultural development landscape of the county better than almost anyone. Because her company had been attempting to reshape it for years. She knew which grant programs existed and which ones small farmers routinely missed. Because the application process was designed for people with grant writers, not people mending fences at dawn. She knew which cooperative arrangements between local producers and regional distributors were underutilized and which ones could be unlocked with the right introduction. She knew the county commissioner who had quietly been building a rural sustainability initiative that had money attached to it, but no organized participants. She did not do any of this for Joel specifically. She built the infrastructure for all of them. Over the following 2 months she worked with the county extension office and 2 neighboring farm owners to formalize a cooperative that gave small dairy and livestock producers in the Millhaven area direct access to 3 regional markets that had previously been closed to them. She connected the cooperative with the Sustainability Initiative, which brought grant funding for equipment upgrades and operating cost relief. She spoke at a county planning meeting about the value of rural production corridors in a way that 3 commissioners later described privately as the most persuasive argument they'd heard on the subject in a decade. Joel still worked every hour God sent. He still got up before the sun and fed the animals and packed Arthur's lunch and ran the numbers on the kitchen table. But the numbers had started to change, and the cooperative gave him a stability that felt different from rescue. It felt like ground. The agricultural loan was restructured in February, with terms he could meet. He signed the paperwork at the kitchen table while Arthur was at school, and then he sat with a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the pasture for a while, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he was going to be all right. On the first warm Saturday in March, Millhaven held its annual early spring market in the town square. The kind of event that is technically about local vendors, but actually about people who have been indoors for 4 months, finding reasons to stand in the same place and talk. Joel had a booth for the farm's cheese and soap products, which Arthur considered glamorous in a way that working cheesemaking did not quite justify. Diane came by mid-morning, in jeans and that dark sweater, and she bought 2 rounds of cheese from Arthur, as if she hadn't been to the farm often enough to simply take them. And Arthur gave her a price that was either a child's discount or a child's error, and she paid it without comment. Later, when Arthur had wandered off to investigate a booth selling wooden carved animals, Joel and Diane stood at the edge of the square with cups of cider in the thin sunshine and watched the town move around them. "Your father would have liked this," Joel said. She looked at him, surprised. "I mean the cooperative. What you built for the county. I think that's closer to what he meant than what he said." She was quiet for a moment. "He always said I was better than what I was doing with it. Fathers usually see that in their kids before the kids do." She looked at him with an expression he recognized, because he had seen it on his own face in the bathroom mirror, on the mornings after he had read Arthur's school reports, or watched his son sleep, or stood in the barn, thinking about what Susan would have made of how the boy was turning out. It was the look of someone understanding something important about themselves for the first time, and finding it both relieving and tender. "Arthur showed me a drawing this morning," she said. "Before you got here to set up, what was it of?" "The 4 of us," she said. "You and me and Arthur and Franklin the dog." Joel paused. "We don't have a dog, I know." She was trying not to smile. "I think the drawing may be aspirational." He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said the obvious thing, because neither of them needed to. The obvious thing had been accumulating for months, quietly in the way the best things always seem to. Unannounced, without agenda, the way morning comes in before you notice the sky has changed. "He drew me in the house," she said, softer now. "Where was I? Also in the house." A pause. It was a family portrait. Joel looked out at the square, at Arthur crouching in front of the carved animal booth, with his face 6 inches from a wooden bear, completely absorbed, the way he was when something captured him fully. Then he looked back at Diane. "He's 7, he said. He doesn't miss much." "No," she said. "He doesn't." They stood in the thin March sun and finished their cider, and after a while Arthur came back with a small carved crow he had bargained for with his own allowance money, and he pressed it into Diane's hand and said, "For your desk, instead of the rocket dog drawing, which is mine." She closed her fingers around it and said, "I'll put it right next to where the rocket dog drawing used to be." Arthur nodded, satisfied, and then immediately moved on to asking whether they were going to get lunch, because he had done a lot of bargaining and needed to recover. They got lunch. The 3 of them sat at a table outside the diner on the corner, in the sun that was warmer now than it had any right to be. In early March, and Arthur talked about the crow and about his theory that crows were smarter than most people gave them credit for, which Diane confirmed was correct, which sent Arthur into a lengthy description of crow intelligence that required both of them to ask follow-up questions, which they did, because the situation called for it, and because neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. In June, at a summer gathering that the cooperative organized to celebrate its first 6 months, Joel stood with a group of neighboring farmers under a string of lights that someone had hung across the old community barn, and he thought about the letter that had arrived in December, and the way fear feels when it's living in your chest, and you can't move it by yourself. He thought about his father handing him the farm deed and saying, The way fathers say things they mean so much they almost can't say them plainly. Take care of what's yours. He had. He was still here. He found Diane near the edge of the barn, talking to the county commissioner and a woman from the extension office. And she caught his eye across the gathering and held it for a moment, and the look that passed between them had everything in it: the fence line in October, and the solar system rebuilt on the kitchen table, and Arthur's drawing, and the March sun, and two people who had found each other. Not because they were looking, but because they had both, in their separate woes, been trying to get something right. He crossed the barn to where she was standing. She turned toward him as he approached, and the commissioner and the extension officer seemed to find other conversations, because some things are obvious to everyone in a room at the same moment. "Thank you," he said, quietly enough that it was only for her. She shook her head. "You did the work, you gave us the chance to." She looked at him. "That's what he meant. I think, my father. He didn't send me here to give you anything." Her voice was steady but her eyes were full. "He sent me here so I would understand what I was missing." Joel thought about Arthur at home with his aunt tonight, probably already asleep, with one hand on whatever book he'd been reading, surrounded by crayon drawings and rocket ships, and the particular complete certainty of a child who knows he is loved. He thought about how a life that looks like survival from the outside can feel, from the inside, like something that has never been more fully itself. "Think you found it?" he asked. Diane looked up at him, in the warm light of a barn, hung with summer lights in a small town that had started to feel like hers, and she said, simply, "Yes." Outside, the evening moved across the fields the way summer evenings do, slow and gold and unhurried, the kind of light that makes even familiar things look like they're being seen for the first time. And for the two of them, standing in a doorway between what had been and what was coming, that was almost exactly what it was.